Hello, welcome back. You are watching Insight, Raw News' premier news show. I'm your host Enoch Makungu, and today we're going to be discussing Boris's speech. What are the new lockdown policies? The fact that Trump's White House has become a hotspot for coronavirus, and the very unfortunate murder of Ahmaud Arbery. But first, I need to introduce my panel, starting with a sort of a legend here at Raw. It's Adam Blunden. Adam, welcome.
Unbelievable. You join me from a corner of my garden where I'm getting attacked by a washing line. How are you, Enoch?
I'm good. I'm good. Why are you in your garden today, Adam?
I feel we're going to get onto it.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, so that's a surprise for later then.
Yeah.
We're also joined by a good friend of mine, Ninu. Hello, Ninu.
Hello, good afternoon. Hope this is reaching everybody well.
Yeah. So, Ninu, where are you right now?
I am in Birmingham at my great aunt and uncle's place. I was staying at the campus in Warwick till about early April, maybe. I don't know, I've lost track of time. But yeah, I'm unable to go home, so staying in England for now.
Yeah. So how are you finding that? How are you coping?
On one hand, yeah, I do miss my family and I wish I could be with them, especially since my sister is working at a hospital. She's delivering babies during the pandemic. But on the other hand, it's a lot safer in England, I'd say, compared to a country like India, with the population density that it has. So I think I'm a lot safer here, at least. And a lot of the repatriation, like a few repatriation flights have started. And I've been hearing a lot of complaints about them, how like they haven't followed any social distancing, or they got like only 2 hours of notice before their flight. So yeah, I think I'm a little bit lucky actually, even though I'm a bit upset about the whole situation.
Yeah, well, we'll hear more about that in a bit. But also, and now for our last guest, and my boss, and our Welsh correspondent here on Raw News, it's Sian Bolton. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me on. I just want to talk about Wales because no one else will. So yeah, I'm really excited to be on.
Yeah, well, don't worry. Raw News is the one place we can guarantee you get to talk about Wales today. So, to start with, we're going to discuss Boris's new lockdown policies. After a week of anticipation, last night Boris Johnson announced the new measures the government will be taking to not so much ease lockdown, but modify lockdown. To quote, stay alert, control the virus, and save lives. Before we go into the details of what was announced, I want to know how does the panel feel Boris Johnson has been handling the crisis so far? I'll start with you, Ninu.
Okay, fair. How do you think he's been handling it? I think that's a very, very tough question to answer because I'd say it's been a very mixed response from the British government. I'd say some of the things they've done have been pretty good, but overall they took far too long to act in general. I was reading recently about how before England went into full lockdown, Boris ignored multiple meetings and multiple calls across like European leaders and in general with other government officials about the danger of the virus. And I think the government as a whole downplayed its importance before. Maybe they did it to avoid a panic, because countries like America panicked very early on and there was a lot of bulk buying. But I think maybe he did it to avoid that. But regardless, I think the initial action by the government was far too slow. I'm sort of satisfied with what's been going on now. Before we talk about the modification, I mean, up until then as well, we're on complete lockdown. We are allowed, only out once a day for exercise or to do essential shopping and whatnot, which I think was a very good step. It's just disheartening that they didn't do it earlier. And I think they sort of sacrificed safety for public opinion because they didn't want to impose a lockdown or they didn't want to impose panic on us so quickly when they should have been doing it just to save our lives.
Yeah. So you're sort of say there that missteps at the beginning, but now broadly you think they're on the right path. Adam, would you agree with that?
Not really. It's been a bit of a chaotic mess, if I'm being honest. Every single week there is a new policy. Every single week there is something that has gone horribly wrong, whether it's PPE that is out of date, PPE that is broken, whether it's a policy that makes no sense, whether it's communications that make no sense. Nothing has gone well. We are the worst performing country in Europe. It's been awful.
And so do you think it's awful? You would say, fully disagree with Nini, all from the beginning. What in particular do you think the government's got wrong here?
Do you mean so far or today?
Yeah, I would say so far. We'll get on to today in a minute.
It has to be the testing. Otherwise, this would have progressed a lot faster.
So you would say that the failure to build a testing capacity has been the big failure from this government?
The failure to build the capacity and then to deliberately massage the statistics to claim they've met their goal rather than just accepting their own failure.
Yeah. All right. Sian, would you agree with Adam's assessment, or do you think Ninu's, you're more along Ninu's lines?
Yeah, I completely agree with Adam's stance on the whole covering up of things. It's just not necessary. I think honesty is the most important thing at the moment. And I think hindsight's a powerful thing. Like, everyone can say they would have done things differently previously, but I think one thing I can strongly say is yesterday was a bad move. I think I don't think changing the slogan, I don't think making it like a more easy transition out of lockdown is helpful, and I think we're just gonna be on our way to a second peak, genuinely. So yeah, that very much concerns me.
Now, you mentioned the slogan, Sian. The government sort of was bragging for weeks that while they may have made other mistakes, they have the best comms team in all of Europe on this issue. And one of the big things they've been so proud of was the whole sloganeering, sort of stay home, save the NHS, save lives. Of course, their new slogan, stay alert, control the virus. Well, I can't remember the last bit was. I had it written down here. Save lives. There you go. Save lives. Their new slogan has not been met with the same sort of acceptance as their old one. What's wrong with the new slogan? Do you like it? Do you dislike it?
First off, the whole stay alert thing, I think it relies on the fact of a public understanding of how a virus spreads, which I don't think has been demonstrated. I probably couldn't tell you to the greatest degree how the coronavirus spreads. And I think the whole premise of stay alert is relying on people still going out and doing things and being in more crowded places with people, but being alert that there's a virus. And I don't think it's helpful. I think taking away the stay at home thing, even though that still applies to like so many people in England, apart from now just a minority of people that can't work from home to go back to work, is really, really detrimental. And I think we're just going to see people stretching it.
Yeah. Nunu, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely shouldn't be encouraging people to leave the house unless it's, absolutely necessary. I understand that some people need to get back to work. A lot of people cannot earn enough money right now to pay the rent or bills or whatever, and they are unable to work from home. But it shouldn't be the government's job to say, okay, if you can work, go to work, because then you'll have people that don't necessarily need to go to work going to work, right? And right now the priority should be just, if you don't have to go outside, don't go outside. It's almost as simple as that. And as of the new slogan, I sort of get why it's sort of been met by not a lot of love, because why do we care about a slogan when what really matters is policy? A slogan does not matter. Like, it's fun, it's catchy, you can put it on your, it's easy to help it spread, but what matters a lot more is what the government tells us to do right now. Because people will use that as an excuse to do whatever they want, right? Like, people can now use this whole, if you can go to work, sort of as a loophole and step outside, because, it's a lot easier than staying cooped up.
Yeah. Adam, would you agree?
I agree with Nunu. It doesn't intrinsically tell you to do anything, whereas the old slogan did. Yeah. Stay alert isn't something you can tell people to do and they know what to do. Whereas stay home, as a clear message, you can slap it on as many adverts and public information films on TV as you like. Stay alert implies nothing, really.
Yeah, I mean, the government I would sort of seem to agree with you there. They have released several clarifications of the initial stay-at-home slogan, which of course, I can't comment on because I have to stay neutral in this discussion. But moving on, let's get to the sort of meat and bones of what Boris did in fact announce last night.
Yeah.
So I think we should start with the 5 tests he laid out to see what the government is using to see whether or not they can ease lockdown. Do they have sufficient critical care capacity? Do they have a sustained and consistent fall in daily death rate? Is the rate of infection decreasing? Are testing and PPE needs being met? And will decreasing lockdown make the second peak worse on the NHS? What do we think of these 5 tests? Do we think they're enough? Do we think they're thorough? Do we think they're clear, thorough? Do we think the government's meeting them at the minute? Adam, I'll come to you because I know obviously you were the most negative on the government's approach. So I'll come to you on this.
It's the only thing last night that wasn't really that much of a surprise, because it's the same 5 tests they've been talking about for quite a while. They're meeting some of them, but not all of them.
Yeah. Is that general agreement throughout the panel? Or
Yep.
then if I can't, yeah, Sean?
I just think it's far too early. I think you can rely on those tests, but I think as soon as they've seen a slight drop in daily figures, they've decided to try and ease it as much as they possibly can at this point. And I think it's just putting the power into people's hands to make their own decisions. So when the next rise happens, it's not the government's fault, because the restrictions are so unclear.
Yeah. I mean, we've sort of seen already government officials having to go out and clarify what was said last night, which we will, again, I keep saying we'll get onto it later, but we will get onto that later once we finish dealing with what Boris said yesterday. We've also had a comment in from Crawford about the slogan. She said that they say it's condescending as well. We don't need slogans. We need information. Panel, would you say you're in agreement with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest killers at a time like this isn't just the disease, it's people not knowing anything about it. When you look at the places where it's the worst, you see people just assuming that what they're doing is right. Like if you see people that are going outside not practicing social distancing, it's because they don't know all the facts. They don't actually know what's going on. They have been fed misinformation. So the government shouldn't really worry about a slogan. They should be worrying about educating all of us about this and what we can do and what we should do.
Yeah. But again, speaking of what we now can do, the government has announced that from Wednesday, you're now allowed to take unlimited amounts of outdoor exercise, including playing sports with members of your family, as long as you observe social distancing. This would seem to be a reversal of the previous, you can only have 1 hour of exercise a day policy. But there are also talks about fines that were previously put in place for people who were breaking social distancing and meeting people outside their households being increased. Do we think this is the right call?
I think it's far too late to be introducing fines. That should have been from the first stage of the lockdown. There should have been fines ready.
Just to clarify, these were already introduced, but then the government's now increasing the fines. And I think clarifying what exactly means you can get fined.
Yeah. I mean, again, that clarity should have been there from the first stage, And as for the exercise thing, again, why does it really matter how long we're allowed to go out to exercise? You shouldn't. Now all this will do is encourage people to go out more. You shouldn't be doing that. Like, even if they need the exercise, they had a whole hour of that earlier, right? And there are ways to exercise indoors. It isn't. I'm sorry, but having unlimited time to exercise with your family isn't a necessity at this time being. It's it might lift spirits. It might be really important to people's mental health. But right now, we're at a real time of crisis. It just does not matter.
Yeah, Adam, would you agree with that?
The problem is, it's never been that well enforced to begin with, and now all the language has gotten more vague. It just makes it more difficult for the people who are supposed to be enforcing this to actually do anything at all. Doubling the fines doesn't help.
Yeah, I mean, this is the police association did come out yesterday and say that the looser rules are already making it hard to enforce things, and we saw many incidents where police officers were seen either accused of being overly aggressive in enforcing things, or were seen sort of flagrantly violating the lockdown rules. And now going forward with looser rules, do we think that's going to become a even bigger issue of police not knowing what's going on? Sean, I'll come to you.
It's crazy. I just don't think anyone really has any clarification at the moment as to what's meant to be happening. I think when the lockdown was originally announced by Boris Johnson, it was like the one thing I can praise it on, that it was so clear in what you were allowed to leave your house for and what you weren't allowed to leave your house for. And this is just so beyond confusing. And I also, a point on fines is they're just classist as well, because I've seen there was a Facebook group made on Facebook of people trying to get to their second homes in North Wales, and they were sharing ideas on how you could cross the border into Wales without the police knowing. And a lot of the comments on that were talking about how the fines didn't really bother them, because if it's a family of 5, it's £300. That's nothing to them. So it just encourages people that have a higher income to just flout the rules, because there's no real impact on them at all.
Yeah. But you sort of mentioned sort of class distinctions, and one thing that's been provoking a lot of people to say, one particular policy has been saying, got a lot of people saying that it's classist, is the new work from home policy, where Boris Johnson has said people who can't work from home should now be actively encouraged to return to the workplace. He specified construction workers. Adam, I think that segues back into something you were saying earlier. What's the panel's reaction to this, that Boris Johnson now actively encouraging people to return to work, even though by his own admission we're still in a very dangerous phase of the coronavirus? Adam?
It is classist. It is what it is. There are people who have had to go back to work today. Even in my street, people are working. There are builders outside working on houses, and it's just, I don't know what more to add.
Ninu?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I wouldn't say it's just classist. It's also a little bit unintelligent to be encouraging anybody to do anything. I know it almost sounds like I'm repeating myself now, but it's almost as if, they need someone to tell them this multiple times because they just aren't listening. You shouldn't be encouraging anybody to work unless they absolutely necessarily have to. The problem is, now that he's encouraged people that cannot work from home to go work, what this does is, a lot of the people that have jobs in manual labor are people that aren't earning high wages, right? So they might be struggling during the time of this pandemic. So now when Boris says, okay, you're allowed to leave the house to work if you can't work from home, these people, a lot of these lower wage earners are going to leave the house to work, right? So it ends up becoming an issue of class, because people who are earning enough, or people that have enough wealth to survive now, don't have to leave their houses at all, while people that aren't earning enough have to risk their health. And it also sort of ties into how all the essential workers don't earn enough either, and they're out there risking their lives as well. Going outside, if you have to go outside to work, it is risking your life. It's also risking the life of everybody in your household and the elderly in your area, right? It just is. And what this policy does is it sort of encourages people in the lower classes to go out there and risk their lives, while people in the higher classes don't. So I think he should not have encouraged this. I don't think that was his intention, but he absolutely should not have encouraged people to go to work, right? I don't know. Yeah.
And Sean, would you agree, disagree? Yeah.
I have 2 key thoughts on this. The first off is it's encouraging people to go back to work, and those people will disproportionately be working class. And it's also encouraging people not to use public transport to go back to work. And that's seen then as you should walk or cycle or drive. And for a lot of people, those aren't options whatsoever, particularly in London and other big cities, that you aren't in walking or cycling distance to your place of work and you don't own a car. I think it's just a complete oversight on the government in that sense. And also, I think encouraging people to go back to work. It's because in England the furlough scheme has been completely overused. The government never expected the furlough scheme to be used to such a great extent, and it has been, which has saved a lot of people's jobs. But I don't think the government can see in the long term how they can afford to be furloughing such a high amount of the population. So by encouraging these people to go back to work, it's taking the pressure off them in furlough. So I understand why they've had to make this step, but it really hasn't taken into consideration those kind of factors. It just seems like everything's being kind of put out with like a middle class lens, of like, oh well, most people can work from home, which just isn't true unless you have an office job.
Yeah. We've had another comment in from Crawford. They've said, it's classists and the working class are guinea pigs being used to measure the rate of a second spike under the guise of it being there to support the economy. What do we think? Adam, I saw you nodding. I'll come to you first on this.
I mean, it's true. That's precisely what it is. It's being used as a way of kind of testing the waters. And no one, or very few people, seem to be noticing that that's what it is. They're using an alert system in the knowledge that it will probably end up going back up again.
Yeah. Do you all agree? Ninu, do you agree?
Yeah, I think the government, along with many experts, know that once they start to ease the lockdown, there is bound to be a second spike, and they're desperate to make it smaller than the original spike. And I think their thought process is that we need to boost the economy, while we can, like, to ensure that we have an economy and we all come out of lockdown. We need to boost it, and I think people sort of view it as just the price of doing business. The price of boosting the economy is that these people have to risk their lives, and it disproportionately affects the working class. I don't think it was like a nefarious, I don't think they like intentionally went, let's use the working class as guinea pigs. But I think that is what ended up happening, because they are prioritizing the economy, and they're prioritizing, function of the country after the pandemic, and sacrificing the welfare of their citizens in order to do so.
Adam, do you want to respond to that?
Not particularly, besides agreeing with it, no.
Oh, okay. Sean?
I just think I'm just a bit mad. I'm trying not to say anything because it will just be angry. But no, I think also things like construction and those kind of jobs which have been actively encouraged to go back to work are not jobs where social distancing is going to be effective in any form, which is just even more of a risk. And we're living in like a place now where people's first interactions with people outside their household in 6-7 weeks are going to be their managers and not their family. And that's still heavily discouraged and a finable offence to see your family at a socially distance, but not to see your co-workers working on building things that aren't particularly necessary for the fight against coronavirus.
Yeah. We had another comment in from Crawford. They've said there's also issues with working class people working from home, in the fact they can't afford to purchase equipment required to work from home, like paper, pens, and printers. I think there also is a huge issue of people being also enabled to access materials they need to work from home. There was earlier this year, the government said to MPs, "You're working from home now." They also did provide a grant to help support MPs' workers to buy the equipment they need. Do you think there's any hope for some sort of a similar scheme to help enable people to work from home coming from the government, or do we think that's a lost cause?
I think it's down to the employers, and I think that's the sad thing, but that is the employer's responsibility to ensure that if they want them to work from home, that they have the equipment they need. I can't see the government enrolling anything like that, particularly when you think about how many direct employees there are of the government. When you think about civil service and everything like that, there's far too many of their own employees that they have to worry about.
Yeah.
And I have to agree with that just because I don't think it's feasible. I think in terms of, the government's employees, there's such a wide range there that they wouldn't be able to necessarily purchase equipment for every one of their workers, just not just because it would be expensive, but because of like the range of different operations that they do, like the range of different tasks that they do. All the equipment will have to be different, and I doubt there's really a chance that private companies go, okay, we're gonna fund our workers so that they can work at home and then we can pay them a salary, because now because that would cost them more money. What they can do now is say, oh no, our workers can't work from home. The government's encouraging them to go to work if they can't work from home. So let's just tell them that if they want to pay their bills, if they want to feed their family, their only option is to come here and work physically on site, right? So I don't think there's a chance that any like profit-seeking business is going to take the option to do the right thing when they have the option to keep money right now. And I think a lot of companies have taken that route.
Yeah. One thing before we start to move less away from what Boris Johnson said yesterday, more into reaction to it, both from the devolved powers, which is Wales, so I'm not going to talk about Wales, and from the public and the press. Boris Johnson said last night that if you want to meet one person who's not in your household, that is permissible, but not two. But Dominic Raab said this morning that if you want to say meet both parents in the park, that's something allowed. And also, he said rather than return to work today, as Boris Johnson said you should return to work on Wednesday, which would seem more in line with everything else announced. But then he was immediately contradicted by the cabinet secretary. So why is the government incapable of producing a consistent line on this? Why can they not simply have one big presentation and everyone follows that single line? What's happening? Sian, you're a politics student. I'll come to you.
I think, to be honest, they don't really know. I think the thing that got me most last night was the fact they encouraged people to start work from Monday and they announced it at like 7 p.m. on a Sunday night. Like, how do you expect people to coordinate so quickly? And I don't think the government has a clear plan of what they're doing. If you could just compare it to like the plan that's been set out by the Republic of Ireland, that's a very detailed and easy to follow plan. And we're not seeing the same from the English government at all. I think that's why it's so difficult for cabinet ministers to like agree on things.
Yeah, so in that case, what should people do? Should they listen to what Prime Minister said last night or the most recent advices? No?
I think they should listen to the most recent advices because it seems to be a pattern that every time the Prime Minister speaks, someone needs to clarify what he meant, and then someone needs to clarify what people should actually be doing. Because it's almost as if there's zero consensus here. It's almost as if, some of the members of the parliament just go, okay, we're going to say this without consulting with the rest of them. And then the entire government is in agreement about anything this pandemic. I'd say go with the most recent because that tends to be the most refined opinion. But while I say that, I am aware that most people will go with, obviously what the Prime Minister says, because at the end of the day, he's the Prime Minister of the country. And no matter what Dominic Raab says, no matter who clarifies after him, the fact of the matter is that Boris said, Boris encouraged people to start working from Monday. So people are going to listen to that, regardless of what regardless what any other member of the government says.
Well, yeah. So yeah, thank you for that. So we're gonna start talking about the reaction, sort of the reaction from the public and reaction from the press towards Boris Johnson's responses, because it has not been overly positive. Even from some members of the press who've sort of been for the last few weeks, we've been more positive towards lockdown. Proposals. They are not particularly happy with what happened today. Over the last week, we've seen lots of members of the media basically saying on Sunday Boris was going to announce a sort of a new freedom to ring, lockdown was over. And now that that's not happened, many of them have not been pleased. I believe one newspaper put out the headline saying the long walk to freedom as part of their coverage of Boris Johnson's sort of new proposals. Why do we think this has gone down so badly, members of the media? Adam?
Well, a good government would have put out a detailed plan. It would have put out, here's every eventuality, here's what you should do, here's actual details. last night we had a 15-minute pariah with PowerPoint slides with clip art on a curve that meant nothing. And it leads to the same misses we've been talking about. It leads to people wondering at 7:30 on a Sunday night whether they've got to be at work at 8 o'clock the next morning. It leaves employers, either big employers, wondering, okay, how can we get everyone back to work quickly? Or it leaves small employers wondering, have we now got to get everyone back to work? Or do we keep our staff at home for their own safety? It's that miscommunication, and it's the fact that the government is effectively trying to govern by not documents, not speeches in Parliament, not actual oversight, but like just chats on LBC.
Yeah, Nilu, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree, and I'd like to add that I think the government sort of made its own bed in this regard. I think when it comes to official announcements, especially from the top, from Boris and Rab, they've tried so hard to be positive and optimistic because they don't want people to panic, and more importantly, I think they don't want people to get angry at them, right? Because they know they took too long to address this problem. So whenever Boris addresses the problem now, he addresses it in terms of weeks. He goes, okay, let's stay inside for a couple of weeks, and then one day we'll see all of our families. And then 2 weeks after, he goes, okay, let's stay inside for another couple of weeks, and then we can all have fun again. He's thinking in weeks when this is a problem that, in all honesty, might take a year, might take that we have no clue how long it might take to properly properly combat. He's thinking in such small time periods. I think that leads to a lot of the public's negative response towards a lot of what he says, especially yesterday's. Because a lot of people went into this thinking, okay, he's gonna say that we might be able to see a few of our friends, and he comes out and he says, oh, you can go back to work. Oh, but also please stay at home and be careful. Like, nobody knows what's going on. I mean, nobody really knows what's happening, right? The members of the government are contradicting each other, and Boris is still pretending that in another 2 weeks we can all have a nice party and hang out together.
Yeah, I think one response I particularly noticed was on this morning, Philip Schofield came out against Boris Johnson's plan yesterday. Do we think this sort of marks a big turning point? Because obviously before we've seen people may not be happy being in lockdown, but they have largely supported it because obviously they thought it was the right way to go. Do we think this is a turning point of people saying, actually, I'm not happy with what's going on anymore? Sean, I'll come to you. That's not too much. I'll say less now.
I just don't understand, the announcement was supposed to be on Friday. They delayed it to Sunday, had an extra 2 days, and they've come out with the most confusing information they could have possibly presented. And it's just like you're telling me I can't because I'm in Wales, but if I was in England, I could go see an unlimited number of strangers in a local park as long as I stood 2 meters away from them, but I couldn't see any of my family or one family member at a time, because that's an offence, but not seeing potentially 1,000 strangers in a big park in London. It's a really, really dangerous statement that the government's made, and I really think they really bragged about how the R number is below 1, but it is only below 1 because social distancing has been so effective, and the second you lift that, the R number will raise, and I think it's something the government has not taken into account in the slightest.
Yeah, well, we here at Raw News asked our watchers and listeners what they thought about the government's announcements last night. One person replied, almost 40 minutes to announce what feels simultaneously piecemeal and dangerous, but another did say they thought it was good, to be honest, statistics-based, sensible, clear. Obviously, I get to the panel does not agree with the second comment, but do we think what something we're noticing more and more is at least 61% of people did not think last night's announcement clarified anything for them? What was missing yesterday that you feel would have made everything make a bit more sense?
A plan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you just think there was you did not get any overall plan from Boris's statement yesterday?
There was no detailed plan at all. If you have a specific situation you want clarification on, you have to wait. Simple as that.
Sean, would you agree?
There's just no clear guidelines, like I've been saying repeatedly. There's just no clear guidelines. When lockdown was announced, there was clear guidelines that people could follow, and I believe people were following to the best of their ability and knowledge. But as soon as you take that knowledge away of what the guidelines are, how are people meant to follow that to the best of their ability? It's going to lead to people just doing whatever, because there's so much like vagueness in what is being expected of them.
Of course, one thing that can't help with that vagueness is the difference between the rules in England and the rules everywhere else in the UK, which means we're now going to talk about this response from the devolved powers. Sean's smiling already. Sean, last night while Boris Johnson was promoting his new slogan, the SNP and Wales were supporting the old one, stay home, and the old stay home slogan. Sean, what do you think about the big difference? What's the big difference between what Westminster's doing and what Wales and Scotland are doing?
I think the big difference is Wales announced on Friday the lockdown's continuing. The only changes at all in Wales is that we can exercise more than once a day, but it has to start and end at our home, because our exercise requirements have always been stricter in Wales. And also garden centres. Some garden centres will be reopening with social distancing, and councils can start looking into opening recycling centres and libraries. That's it. For another 3 weeks. I think it was the right move. It really concerns me in a place like Wales. Our NHS is underfunded compared to England's to begin with, and we also have to deal with a lot of people moving to second homes in Wales, particularly in rural areas where there's not a lot of hospitals at all. I think, I could be completely wrong, but I think there's only 1 or 2 hospitals in all of North Wales. So it is really troubling to be a Welsh person at this point. So I'm glad that the Welsh government took that line. I do feel like the line was taken just to annoy England a little bit, but in hindsight, I'm glad they took it. I'm just hoping that there's not a complete lack of, a complete confusion over England and Wales's guidelines, because I think the knowledge of a devolved parliament is not something that we have very much of in Wales. I don't have the best knowledge of the devolved Welsh Parliament. I think now is really starting to show how important the Welsh government is to me as a Welsh person, which it hasn't before.
Yeah, Adam, I'll come to you. So do you sort of agree with what Sean's saying, that the main reason that Wales and Scotland are taking these sort of stances is to annoy England, or do you think it's based on serious public health interest?
I think the approach from Scotland has been different to the one from Wales, for different reasons. Scotland still has.
I was you're about to start summarising, but I was about to ask you, can you summarise what Scotland's doing? So
Scotland doesn't have as much of the same tourist pressures in the same way as Wales does from England, and it has obviously higher population, and it just seems to have a kind of a better grasp of the science. You saw Nicola Sturgeon immediately tweeting after the statement last night the old slogan in capitals, and it's that message that keeps being driven home, that there is an action for people in Scotland to do, whereas in England there's nothing. Yeah,
do we agree with that? Do we agree that Scotland and Wales are largely sticking to a right path, whereas in England we seem to just abandon it? And then obviously you're the only person left to speak on this, so I'll come to you on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what the evidence suggests. I think maybe the Scottish and Welsh leaders have been a bit more sensible when it came to setting expectations and actually setting a plan. I think, like I've mentioned before, I think the plan here for us in England was just, guys, wait, this is just a minor pause. I also think since England and especially London are big financial hubs, the pressure on the government here from businesses on the economic side to protect the economy has been incredibly high, which has led to maybe a little bit more intentional vagueness or disregard just in order to keep businesses running. But I don't know, that is a bit speculative.
Yeah, and Sean, I'll come to you. I'll come to you for a final word on this topic. What's the last thing you want to say about how Wales is handling the crisis?
Okay, so I first off would like to say Wales doesn't have a national press in the same way that Scotland does, which is why there's been so much misinformation spread, and I feel like Wales really isn't being like fought for on this kind of level. In addition, I think England has really threw Wales under the bus because we have a separate NHS and not taken into account how dependent we are on England through England's own doing in other ways. For example, the UK government went out and told foreign companies not to supply any PPE to devolved administrations, to only supply it to England. And also the Welsh government made a deal for 5,000 tests with a company, and over 4,000 of them were taken by the UK government before they got to Wales. And we've essentially been told we can't make any of those kind of deals. And while I understand some of the arguments for, we have a much smaller population, it completely takes away any of Wales's agency. And that really worries me. I feel like England's completely shoved us to the side a little bit. So I hope the Welsh government will counteract it in a way. But I think, yeah, I really hope Wales can continue to run under the circumstances it has, but I think it's raised a load of really interesting questions about devolved parliaments and where they exist in the UK. And I wouldn't be surprised if after all of this is over in a few years' time, calls for Scottish independence will be on the uptake again, because I think this crisis has just shown how little the UK government cares about devolved nations.
Thank you, Sean. Now, we move away from the UK to focus on America for the final 20 minutes of this broadcast. We're going to start, we have two topics here to discuss, obviously Trump White House and obviously the unfortunate murder of, I can't pronounce his name right now, but I'll get back to you in a second. We'll start with the Trump story, because I think that's something we can get through fairly quickly. Donald Trump has sort of spent the last few weeks flouting all the rules. He's not been wearing a mask. He's been shaking hands freely. The testing going on in the White House has apparently been very sparse. And now 3 members of the White House are officially coronavirus positive. The press secretary, his vice president, and 2 members of the anti-coronavirus task force. I guess all I can say is, panel, what's your reaction to this? What's your reaction to the sort of Trump's White House becoming a hotspot for coronavirus?
Who's surprised? I mean, who is surprised? Really? The man that refused to do elbow bumps and shook everybody's hand. Now his White House is sick. He refused to wear a mask. He refused to condemn people that were protesting. I mean, who is surprised by what is going on? The government in America have been so completely and utterly inept. They've almost treated it like, okay, man, the people can handle it themselves. They don't need us. And all that does is encourages, skeptics, and all that does is encourage people that would place their business focus over the lives of people. All it's done is encourage them, because the government's not doing anything to say they're wrong. That all the experts will say is like, okay, man, stay at home. That's cool. Do what you want. Yeah, they have a lockdown imposed in a lot of states, but that's clearly not enough. Look at their death rate, look at the number of deaths. They're not doing enough. And they somehow, it's almost as if they refuse to do so. And Trump in particular seems particularly uncooperative with saving his own country. He skirts questions. It's almost as if he's taking it like a joke. And I think the fact that, the White House was a hotspot for the disease, it just does not surprise me. It's like it was written in the stars here.
Do we agree, panel? Adam?
Sorry.
Sean? No.
I think one of the big problems is that President Trump has demonstrated that he doesn't handle criticism well. And I think the second there was any sort of criticism of his administration and its tackling of the coronavirus pandemic, he backtracked. And that is why it's been handled so poorly, because every time he was criticized, he would stand his ground again and again without taking into account how much the science has changed. I think it is deeply concerning, the situation in America, but I also do think the rights of individual states are important to decide their own lockdown measures and enforcements, but I do think there needs to be at least an acceptance on the US federal government level that this is a serious issue and it needs to be treated seriously by each state, and it's a public health issue, and just generally I think it's just been handled so poorly. But I really hope everyone in the White House that has got it gets better soon.
Yeah, and Adam, you had the final word on this before we move to the story of Ahmaud's unfortunate murder.
I mean, inside the White House itself, it had this kind of air of inevitability that Nini has already talked about. But it poses important questions for the next few months in the US, because we've seen various debates across various states about postal voting in November's election. And in some states, like California, that's gone straight through. Everyone will vote by post in November. Some states are opposing it. And it's a debate that's not going to be conducted well. It's not going to end well. And it feels like exploiting a crisis a little bit.
Yeah. So we now turn to our last story. This is I want to put up front a trigger warning here in case anything we talk about here, sort of elements of racial profiling here, and of course death. So if any of these are too far for you, just start watching now. Ahmaud Arbery was a 25-year-old black man jogging in Georgia, and he was shot and killed by a father and son in February. And there was a video was made of this at the time, but the video was not released until 10 weeks afterwards, where it was discovered that the police had failed to arrest the two men who had been found at the scene of the crime and had been temporarily detained but then released at the scene of the crime, had failed to arrest or charge the two men with anything until the video was, and in fact only did so a few days ago, once after the video was released. And this has raised many questions, not just about racial profiling in America, but corruption in particular in the police system. So I want to go to panel. Nina, you came on particularly just to talk about this. I want to come to you first and what your reactions are to this story.
So obviously, before I say anything, I'd like to say my condolences and thoughts go out to the family of this young man. Before I begin, I'd like to say I am a person of color. I live in a Western country. And, I understand casual racism. I've had to deal with it my entire life. I come from a society that is incredibly whitewashed, where, when we have darker parts of our skin, we're told to scrub harder to wash the dirt off. Where in our movies, all the villains are quintessentially dark, while the beautiful women in stories are always fair-skinned. We all come from societies that are inherently racist, and I think we have come so far, of course, but it's still so shocking and so saddening to see that, and sometimes we have not come nearly far enough. This story sort of came to my attention when I saw LeBron James talking about it on Instagram, and he said, we can't even go out for a jog, and we just can't even go out for a jog. And obviously, of course, that is a generalization. I'm not saying that no people of color, they can't go out of the house. All I'm saying is the fact of the matter is that racial profiling is still a massive, massive problem. And the American government, and more importantly, the American law enforcement, like to pretend it's not. I have had friends, I've had people tell me multiple times, oh, but the problem is then people will always say that, oh, race is always a factor, even when race isn't a factor. The fact of the matter is, in our deeply entrenched society, Racism is so deeply entrenched in our society, in our systems, and especially in our law enforcement, that in every single case, race is a factor, and we need to sort of admit that, and we need to deal with it. I'm almost sick and tired of seeing innocent, not even innocent people of color being victimized. It's not always a shooting, it's not always murder, and it's not all, and they don't always get away with it. But the fact of the matter is that it happens so often. It happens enough for that all this had to be done was that, I mean, it happens enough that we need to discuss it as a problem. And we need, the first step to fixing this is for the government and for the law enforcement to admit that there are problems with their system, right? I'm not saying that every person of color is innocent and that they don't commit crimes. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the way we bring people to justice is incredibly broken. And this goes beyond just Ahmaud Arbery. This goes beyond just that one man. And I think that if we let this go away without a bigger discussion, then we are tarnishing the legacy of this man, and that we are letting him have passed away for absolutely nothing.
Yeah, panel, would you agree? Or Sean, would you agree with what Nidhi said?
Yeah, it's a really horrible thing that happened, and it's something unfortunately I don't know too much about. I've seen it covered on my social media, but that's pretty much it. And I think it really demonstrates just how entrenched, like Ninu said, it is in our society, in American society, just globally. And I think it really shows time and time again, we see how little the US police force want to deal with these issues and consistently cover up issues of race like this, which is really, really damaging to the US population.
Adam?
It makes you think about kind of how you'd report, say, a murder in this country, in the UK, as a white person. This took an entire community organising to bombard a police force with requests to investigate this for a crime that was caught on video. It's abhorrent.
Yeah. One particularly odd part of the case is that the video was actually released not by Arbery's lawyer, but by his murderer's lawyers, who they thought the video would sort of exonerate them, because they thought no one watching that video could not believe that Arbery had been menacing towards his two murderers. What? Sorry, this is a very hard one to talk about. What is it about? Do you not just racism? Actually, yeah, I'm going to say racism. I'm sorry, Sean, if this is too
No, keep going, keep going.
What is it about racism and racists that makes them utterly incapable of seeing the humanity in other people, and just honestly needing to look at the video, like be able to look at, not just look at the video, but make the video, because the video was made by a friend of theirs who was recording them doing it. I just think this video proves how righteous we were to do this, how absolutely spot on we were. And this is a very
I mean, this is incredibly hard for me to talk about as well, but I think we need to have a discussion about it in general. I think the thing is, yes, I mean, obviously there will always be individual cases of racism, right? There always will be. You're never going to fully eliminate a mindset, right? But the fact of the matter is, the reason why it can become a movement, the reason why these racists can look at something like that and be like, oh yeah, look at us, we were in the right, was because the system sometimes bends their way. Right? Look at this. These men only got arrested after we made it a big deal, right? The system let them get away with it. If this had just been two men shooting an unarmed black man for racist reasons, and then they got arrested, served their sentence, went to jail, that would be a completely different story. But the story is that they got away with it until someone kicked up enough of a fuss that they didn't get away with it anymore. And it's not just this one-off, right? If this was just a one-off, there wouldn't be such an uproar. This happens a lot more often. People get away with hate crime just because the system bends away with them. And sometimes it's the government themselves. There are over 1,500 monuments and memorials to Confederate soldiers and generals in the United States of America. And I do not understand how that can be accepted. Those were men that, yes, sacrificed their lives fighting for what they believed in, but what they believed in was slavery. Yes, that may not have been the only thing they were fighting for, but the fact of the matter remains that there are 1,500 memorials and monuments to people that fought to enslave an entire race still up in this country. And majority of them didn't come up immediately after a war. A majority of them came up in the 60s and 70s as Jim Crow laws were going away, because people wanted to impose superiority over the African American people. Because yes, one-off racists will always exist, and people will tell you that, a few bad apples. It's just a few bad apples. But the fact of the matter is that the system doesn't inherently discourage them from being this way. They can get away with it. They have gotten away with it, and until things change, they will continue to get away with it.
Yeah. Of course, the question is, how will things ever change? And honestly, it sort of seems every passing year, every sort of story like this, where you can only achieve justice with horrifying acts like this, when someone records it and shares that video, it does sort of drain your ability to believe anything actually can be fixed in these sort of issues. But you have to, nevertheless, you have to persist, as Americans say. So it's a very weird one to ask questions about, obviously. So I almost apologize for bringing you all on here and then not being able to ask you anything. I think unless anyone else had anything they want to say, this might be a good place to start drawing insight to a close. With Sian, Adam, do you have anything else you want to add to this discussion?
I just want to say Ninu raised a really good point about how the US political and historical idea of itself is based off intrinsically celebrating slave owners and people that perpetuated ideas that Black people were inhuman. And I think that is still an undercurrent in the US and in other countries as well. And I think it's a really good point that Ninu raised that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Adam?
I don't really have anything to add here.
Yeah, that's perfectly fair. Yeah. Well, with that, I guess we'll start bringing this insight to a close. Thank you all for joining us and watching along and commenting. Especially thank you for commenting. It's always really good to get comments, and it sort of helps us feel like we're not just alone talking to a void here. Insight will return next week at the same time. And then, but also if you want to get more raw news during the week, there is another show tomorrow, the Alternative View, and they are doing a question and answer session with Zizi Zhang, who is the current sort of international students officer here at Warwick. So if you want any questions, please send them into @RawNews, and we will try and get them to tomorrow to ask them. But yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for coming along, and I hope you have a very pleasant week. Thank you.
Thank you.